Among the illustrious queens of Anglo-Saxon England, none shine more brightly in the annals of history than Emma of Normandy. As the consort of two powerful monarchs, Æthelred the Unready and Canute the Great, Emma's life story is a grand epic set against the backdrop of one of England's most tumultuous eras, a time rife with the death of kings and the collapse of mighty dynasties. Emma was far from being a mere accessory to the men around her. She wielded her own power with masterful skill. Her keen intelligence and strategic foresight enabled her to hold sway as the Queen Consort of England, Denmark and Norway at the height of her influence. Emma's legacy extends beyond her own reign, as she was the mother of kings. Her sons Harthacnut and Edward the Confessor both ascended to the throne, continuing the legacy of their formidable mother. Her life story is not just one of survival, but also a relentless pursuit of power, influence, and the protection of her dynasty. This is the tale of Emma of Normandy, a woman who rose to the highest echelons of power through sheer will. Emma of Normandy was born on the 23rd of June of the year 985, into a lineage steeped in nobility and legend. She was the daughter of Duke Richard I, known as the Fearless, a formidable ruler who greatly expanded the boundaries of Normandy, earning the title of its first duke. Her mother, Countess Gunnar, was a woman of Scandinavian descent, well versed in the ways and traditions of the North. Emma was one of 10 legitimate children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood, and her lineage boasted not only noble blood, but also the fierce spirit of the Vikings, as her great-grandfather was none other than the legendary Viking chieftain Rollo, the first Count of Rouen. In the year 996, when Emma was merely 11 years old, her father Richard the Fearless passed away, leaving a significant void in her life. Following his death, Emma's upbringing was overseen by her mother, Countess Gunnar, as her elder brother Richard II ascended to the ducal throne of Normandy. Gunnar, a woman of intelligence and education, instilled in a young Emma a profound appreciation for their Scandinavian heritage. Fluent in Danish, Gunnar ensured that Emma was well versed in the language of their culture and their Viking ancestors, nurturing a deep connection to their shared ancestry and imbuing her daughter with an understanding of their storied past. By the turn of the millennium, the tides of history began to shift once more as Viking raiders resumed their incursions into England. These warriors often sailed across the Channel to Normandy, where they found a welcoming haven for their plunder. Duke Richard II, Emma's brother, provided these Vikings with sanctuary, a controversial act that violated an early treaty signed by their late father Richard I and King Æthelred II of England. The agreement had stipulated that Normandy would not aid England's enemies. This breach of faith led to Æthelred the Unready attacking Normandy. However, the Normans, with their swift and skilled cavalry, repelled the English forces. In an effort to mend the fractured relations between Normandy and England and avoid open war, Duke Richard arranged for his own sister Emma to marry King Æthelred. This union was not merely a marriage, but a political alliance intended to forge a bond between the two realms. At the time of their marriage, Æthelred was an experienced ruler and was around 34 years old, while Emma, in her mid-teens, was considered of suitable age for the marriage at that time. This union symbolized a hope for peace and cooperation between the English and Normans, bridging the gap between two powerful and culturally rich domains. Although Emma of Normandy ascended to become the Queen of England, she was an outsider in a foreign land. Her husband, King Æthelred, had already fathered 9 children with his first wife, Ælfgifu of York, including 6 sons. Despite this established family, Aethelred took great care to ensure that Emma was received as a true and legitimate queen in the eyes of the English court and people. Upon her marriage, Emma was given the Anglo-Saxon name Ælfgifu, a title she was to use in all official capacities. In a grand gesture of recognition and possibly strategy, she was granted numerous estates, including properties in Winchester, Devonshire, Suffolk, Oxfordshire, and in the city of Exeter, likely as part of her dower. These gifts were not merely acts of generosity or affection. Aethelred's decision to marry Emma swiftly after the death of Ælfgifu, who had likely passed away during childbirth, was not driven by personal desire alone. The urgency of this union was a reflection of the dire circumstances England faced amidst the relentless Viking incursions. Aethelred's insistence on Emma being honoured as a queen, along with the lavish properties bestowed upon her, were calculated moves to carry favour with her brother, Duke Richard II of Normandy. By treating Emma with the utmost respect, and bestowing upon her a prestigious Anglo-Saxon name, Aethelred aimed to ease the apprehension of his subjects, who had historically been wary of foreign queens. Through these acts, Aethelred sought to forge a bridge between his kingdom and the Norman court, ensuring that Emma's foreign origins would not sow discord among his people or undermine the stability of his reign. Despite all his efforts, Emma never won the favour of the English people, who viewed her with suspicion and believed she harboured sympathies for the Danes. Her marriage to King Æthelred was distant and lacked warmth. Spanning 14 years, their union only produced 3 children: Alfred, born around the end of the year 1002, Edward in the year 1003, and a daughter named Godgifu in around the year 1004. Given Æthelred's 9 children from his previous marriage, and Emma's upbringing in a large family, fertility was clearly not an issue for either partner, and the quick succession of their children within the early years of marriage suggests that the couple fulfilled their dynastic duty, but found little personal harmony. It seems that after securing an heir and a couple of spares, Æthelred and Emma's relationship waned. The queen resided not at court, but maintained her own separate household in Winchester, suggesting a deliberate distance from her husband. In the year of 1013, Emma of Normandy, then a seasoned queen, who was now around 28 years old, faced the darkest chapter of her reign. For over a decade, she had worn the crown of England, but now the kingdom trembled upon the might of a foreign invader, Sweyn Forkbeard, the formidable King of Denmark, who unleashed his wrath upon England. His military genius and ruthless strategy forced the once proud ealdorman to bow before him. As his forces marched through the land, the invincible Sweyn captured the heart of the realm, London, securing his place as the newly crowned King of England. As the Danish storm approached, Æthelred, in a desperate bid to protect his queen and heirs, sent Emma and their young sons into exile. They fled to the sanctuary of Normandy, where Emma's brother Duke Richard offered refuge. The journey was fraught with uncertainty, as Emma left behind the land she had grown to know, her fate bound by the whims of war and politics. Yet, even as Sweyn Forkbeard seemed to stand unassailable, fate dealt a cruel hand. A mere 5 weeks after his triumphant ascension, Sweyn met an untimely death. His brilliance is what held England under Viking rule, and after his death, the ealdormen, yearning for the familiar, summoned their old king from his exile. Æthelred would reclaim the throne. However, in the Danelaw, the region under Danish influence, the people declared allegiance to Canute, Sweyn's son, who commanded the loyalty of his father's battle-hardened army. The kingdom stood divided and poised on the edge of chaos. Despite the formidable opposition, Æthelred mustered his strength, and with the support of his loyalists, drove Canute's forces from England. Emma, bearing the weight of her crown and the tumultuous tides of fate, returned to her adopted homeland. The shadows of war and loss loomed large over her, as the once vibrant hope of a united realm seemed to fade into a sombre and uncertain future. Both Aethelred and Emma clung to their crowns through the tumultuous years of his reign, but the inevitable came on the 23rd of April of the year 1016, when Aethelred succumbed to death at the age of 50. In his final moments, he was accompanied by the steadfast presence of Queen Emma, then 30 years old. With his passing, Emma found herself isolated in a kingdom that harboured a deep distrust for foreigners, particularly those like her, whose Danish connections were a source of unease. Though Aethelred had fathered 6 sons from his previous marriage, only Edmund remained alive at the time of his death. Emma's own 2 sons by Aethelred were still young, leaving the defence of England to Edmund. Despite Emma's coronation as queen, a distinction denied to Aethelred's first wife, Emma saw her son's claims to the throne overshadowed by Edmund, who was swiftly crowned King Edmund Ironside. Although Emma publicly supported her stepson, she harboured a silent fear for her children's safety. She would send them into exile to the safety of the Norman court, far from the treacherous political landscape of England. During Edmund's brief reign, Emma's presence fades from historical records, suggesting she lived a quiet existence, away from the court's mechanics. Yet the kingdom itself was embroiled in strife. Canute, the son of Sweyn Forkbeard, sought to reclaim the throne he believed was rightfully his, and waged war against Edmund's forces. Emma, steadfast in her support of Edmund, endeavoured to maintain Anglo-Saxon rule in London, as the battles would rage on. On the fateful day of October the 18th of the year 1016, the Battle of Assendon concluded in a decisive victory for Canute. The kingdom was subsequently divided, with Edmund retaining Wessex, while Canute assumed control over the rest of the land. As a result of this conquest, Canute took Emma captive, a grim reminder of her diminished power. Tragedy struck once more when Edmund died on November the 30th, possibly at the hands of an assassin sent by Canute, or from his wounds sustained in battle. In the aftermath, Canute was declared the sole ruler of England, despite the existence of Edmund's sons and Emma's own children, who were equally of royal blood. The kingdom, torn and weary, watched as Emma, once a queen, now stood in the shadow of a new and uncertain era. Canute the Great was now the undisputed ruler of England by right of conquest. In the midst of the kingdom's turmoil, Emma seized the opportunity to assert her own political agency. Known for her resolute nature and sharp intellect, she was not one to remain passive in the face of upheaval. It wasn't long before the new King of England, Canute, sought Emma's hand in marriage. Although he was already married to Ælfgifu of Northampton in a handfast ceremony, Canute's intentions were unmistakable. A union with Emma would cement his rule over England. In Danish nobility, it was not uncommon to have multiple wives, but this particular arrangement was laden with complexities and tensions. Firstly, Canute's Danish heritage made it imperative to align himself with someone well versed in Anglo-Saxon politics to better govern his realm. Emma, with her deep understanding of English customs and governance, was the ideal partner. Secondly, the trope of dowager queens manoeuvring to place their sons on the throne was a common narrative in medieval times, and Emma was no exception. By marrying her and producing new heirs, Canute effectively distanced her from her sons Alfred and Edward, who could have been formidable contenders for the throne. The union forged a crucial alliance with Normandy, mirroring Aethelred's earlier diplomatic efforts. This connection bolstered Canute's political legitimacy and fortified his position in the region. Lastly, for Emma, marrying Canute was a strategic move to retain her power and influence. As the widow of the former king and the mother to potential rivals, her position in England was precarious. Returning to Normandy would have meant fading into obscurity, but by staying with Canute, she remained at the heart of English politics. This marriage therefore was not just a union of two individuals, but a calculated alliance that shaped the political landscape of England and beyond. In the year 1017, Canute was crowned the sovereign ruler of all England in London, with Emma standing by his side, reasserting her status as queen. The duality of Canute's marriages, however, did not sit well with either woman. Both Emma and Ælfgifu harbored resentment towards this arrangement, and their animosity became evident through years of courtly rivalry and mutual slander. Nonetheless, Emma solidified her position as the Queen of England. Her fortunes would soar even higher when in the year 1018 Canute's brother Harold II died without an heir, allowing Canute to also claim the throne of Denmark. This dual monarchy elevated Emma to the prestigious queen of both England and Denmark. Accepting Canute as her husband brought Emma newfound power and influence, far exceeding her previous expectations. In the same year, their son Harthacnut was born, securing a new line of succession. Meanwhile, Emma's two sons from her previous marriage to Æthelred the Unready remained in exile in Normandy, distant and forgotten. This new political and familial reality cast Emma in a complex light. While she thrived as queen, her older son's continued absence painted her as a neglectful mother. Yet for Emma, this alliance with Canute was a masterstroke that ensured her continued prominence and survival in an ever-shifting landscape of power. As queen consort and advisor to Canute, and as a patron to churches and abbeys in England and in Europe, Emma was more powerful than ever, and according to Emma's Iconium, it was a marriage of equals. Canute embarked on a campaign to rehabilitate the English churches and monasteries that had long suffered under Viking raids, replenishing their treasuries and overseeing the construction of new religious institutions. By his side, aiding him, was his queen, Emma. Their efforts extended to supporting monastic communities zealously, reflecting Emma and Canute's commitment to Christianity, as Denmark itself was still on its path to becoming a Christian nation. Emma's son Harthacnut, following the Danish custom, was sent to Denmark to be fostered and trained in the art of governance and warfare, having been named the heir to the kingdom. Emma was reportedly saddened to see her son depart, but she found comfort in her daughter Gunhilda, born of her union with Canute. By the year 1028, Emma had ascended to yet another throne, becoming the Queen of Norway. Her husband Canute had forged a vast kingdom known as the North Sea Empire, an impressive testament to his ambition and prowess. At his side stood Emma, his powerful and steadfast queen. Their marriage, while undoubtedly a strategic alliance, was also marked by a profound affection and mutual respect. It is said that the two were deeply in love, a rare and cherished bond in the often cold arrangements of royal marriages. Canute's insatiable desire for conquest and the splendour of his achievements surely resonated with Emma, who had grown up listening to her mother's stories of the Viking sagas. This shared heritage, along with Emma's fluency in the Danish tongue, undoubtedly drew them even closer, forging a deep and intimate connection. Emma's role as the queen of such a formidable empire was not merely a ceremonial one. She was a partner in Canute's grand designs, a queen who matched the magnificence of her king's ambitions. Emma would ascend to become the richest and most powerful woman in the whole northern realm, as her husband Canute had arguably become one of the most powerful men in the world at the time. However, in the year 1035, Canute would die at around the age of 45. His brilliance and reputation alone is what held his empire together, and upon his death, it would collapse, leaving Emma exposed. Canute's eldest surviving son, Harthacnut, immediately raced to Winchester and seized the late king's treasure in an attempt to secure his own succession to the throne of England. Emma, meanwhile, had her own son, Harthacnut, proclaimed to be Canute's heir by the council at Oxford. Unfortunately for Emma, Harthacnut, now 17 years old, was still in Denmark and was unaware of his father's passing. As such, the council ruled that Harold would be seen as the regent in England until Harthacnut returned to take the English crown. However, Harthacnut could not return to England, as Denmark was now under attack from Norway. Magnus the Good had forced Canute's first son, Sweyn, by Æthelred of Northampton into exile. Thus Magnus took the crown, further fragmenting Canute's fallen empire. This gave Harthacnut, Æthelred's second son, sufficient time to increase support in England for his own claim to the throne. Support for Harold did indeed grow, despite Emma's best attempts at slandering his and his mother's name, but the Witan eventually voted for him to become the king. Emma, who at this point would have been around 50 years old, had few options remaining. In the year 1036, Emma called upon her eldest sons, Alfred and Edward from Normandy, hoping that one of them might claim the English throne. Both men, now in their mid to late 30s, had spent nearly their entire lives in exile. This marked the first time in 2 decades that they had heard from their mother. Emma initially requested that only one son return, but impoverished and without prospects, both brothers decided to journey to England, each seeking their own claim to the crown. Edward managed to secure some financial backing in Normandy and arrived safely in Winchester. However, he was eventually driven out of the country, but remained unharmed. However, Alfred, less fortunate in securing support, took a more arduous route to England. Upon his arrival, he was met by old Godwin, one of Emma's staunchest allies following Canute's death. Alfred, believing himself to be in safe hands, was tragically mistaken. Godwin betrayed him, delivering him to Harthacnut, the reigning king. Hereford could only interpret the sons of Æthelred the Unready arriving to England as a threat to his own ambition, as he wanted to be king. The arrival of the Æthelings could only mean that they wanted the crown. Upon Harold's orders, Alfred was imprisoned, where he endured the brutal act of having his eyes gouged out. He died soon after. In the sombre days of July of the year 1038, Emma received the heart-wrenching news of her youngest daughter's passing, a daughter she had lovingly nurtured to adulthood, Gunhild, who had married the king of the Germans 3 years prior, met her tragic end on a journey on the road, accompanied by her husband's family. A devastating pandemic swept through their ranks, claiming Gunhild as one of its many victims. The exact nature of the disease remains a mystery, though it may have been malaria. This loss was a profound sorrow for Emma, a queen who had already endured so much heartache. In the year 1039, Emma's son Harthacnut, the king of Denmark, journeyed to Flanders to visit his exiled mother. With a heart full of longing and determination, Emma urged her son to reclaim his rightful throne in England and to seize the crown from Harold. She invoked the memory of his father, reminding Harthacnut that he was the designated heir to the North Sea Empire. She painted vivid pictures of the empire's former glory during the height of Canute's reign, when the realm spanned across seas and kingdoms. Moved by his mother's impassioned plea, Harthacnut agreed to take up the challenge. Together, they crafted their strategy to invade England. Emma would help amass a formidable force of mercenaries, while the entire Danish army rallied behind Harthacnut. The stage was set for a clash of titans, as the sons of Canute the Great prepared to face off in a battle for the English crown. Emma's desire to see her own son ascend the throne drove them both into this campaign. However, fate intervened on the 17th of March of the year 1040, when Harold unexpectedly died. Some chroniclers attributed his death to divine retribution, while others whispered of a mysterious illness. Seizing this opportune moment, Harthacnut swiftly assembled his fleet and set sail from Flanders in June. Upon arrival, he faced no resistance and was quickly proclaimed the undisputed King of England. Emma undoubtedly revelled in her victorious return to England, regaining her position of influence at the royal court. Once again, she stood prominently beside her son King Harthacnut, as she frequently witnessed many charters, affirming her regained authority. Her son was now the King of Denmark and England, making the Dowager Queen Emma still a very powerful political figure. During Harthacnut's reign, Emma commissioned her Iconium, a work chronicling her life. Though the text offers a somewhat embellished account of her story, it remains an invaluable artifact from the era, providing rich insights into 11th century English and Scandinavian history. Having experienced the premature demise of several kings, Emma was determined to not leave her fate to chance. She persuaded Harthacnut to summon her son Edward from Normandy, designated him as heir until Harthacnut could produce a son of his own, thereby safeguarding against a potential succession crisis. Emma's motives may have not been purely maternal. Her championing of Canute's lineage over her offspring from Aethelred, including Edward, suggests a pragmatic approach to maintaining power. Edward, who had long been overlooked by his mother in favour of his half-brother Harthacnut, would not easily forget this neglect. Upon Emma's return to England, the memory of her son Alfred's brutal murder weighed heavily on her. She directed her ire towards Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, the most powerful man in the kingdom, apart from the king himself. She accused him of complicity in the prince's death. The Witan, the Council of Nobles, echoed her accusations, leading Godwin to stand trial, a trial instigated by Emma's relentless pursuit of justice. Harthacnut, serving as the judge, presided over the proceedings. Despite the gravity of the charges and the odds stacked against him, Godwin was acquitted, escaping the gallows. Nevertheless, Godwin could not escape the humiliation that followed. As penance, he was compelled to participate in the desecration of Harefoot's tomb. The former king's body was violently exhumed, dragged through the streets, beheaded, and discarded into a sewer. Emma, present at this grisly spectacle, revelled in the public disgrace of Harefoot, the usurper who had claimed her son's crown. For her, this act was not just a moment of triumph, but a vindication of her son's honour and a striking blow against those who had wronged her family. The desecration of Harefoot's remains symbolised a powerful act of retribution, marking Emma's return to power and influence in the kingdom. Harthacnut's reign, though powerful, was marked by turmoil and discontent. In a harsh display of authority, he raised the taxes upon the English people, punishing them for their prior allegiance to his half-brother Harold Harefoot. This already oppressive rule was compounded by an ill-fated harvest, which left the kingdom struggling. Harthacnut's response was ruthless. He commanded his nobles to lay waste to the regions that resisted tax collectors, leaving a trail of death and destruction. Villages that defied him were razed, their inhabitants slaughtered, a grim reminder of his unyielding power. As the sovereign ruler of both Denmark and England, Harthacnut wielded immense power and wealth. His position afforded him a formidable guard, making any assassination attempt a daunting task. Yet, it was at the wedding feast of Tovi the Proud that fate intervened. After raising his cup in celebration and draining it, Harthacnut suddenly collapsed, convulsing on the ground. The mighty king who commanded armies and ruled over two great nations breathed his last, silenced forever. It is unknown if Emma witnessed the poisoning and death of her son, as records do not state if she attended the wedding, but this was now the third child Emma would have to bury. With Harthacnut's passing, the line of Canute the Great was extinguished, leaving a void in the legacy of one of the most formidable dynasties of the era. Edward the Confessor, Emma's last surviving son by King Aethelred, would then take the crown. However, Emma would not enjoy the wealth and political power that Harthacnut had afforded her, as Edward would exact a harsh retribution on his mother, stripping her of all her wealth and lands. This act of vengeance appeared to be meticulously premeditated, as Edward harboured a long-standing resentment towards Emma. Their relationship had always been strained. Emma had exiled him at a young age, reaching out only decades later when it served her own interests. The betrayal deepened when, in response to Emma's call, Edward's brother was brutally blinded and subsequently lost his life, forcing Edward to flee into exile once more. Now seated on the English throne, he unleashed his fury on his mother, leaving no room for reconciliation or mercy. Edward had never been groomed for the throne. He was an outcast who grew up without parents or love in Normandy, and was never expected to ascend. This could explain his terrible decisions in later life, and why he would be remembered as a politically weak king. Emma, despite her formidable nature, found herself utterly powerless against her son's cruelty. While some of Edward's actions can be seen as bitter and harsh, the complexity of their estranged relationship cannot be overlooked. Emma, once the queen of the North Sea Empire and the most powerful woman in the north, was stripped of her influence and resources, and was left to bear the brunt of her own son's wrath. All this was done to her due to her abandoning her sons, while she enjoyed reigning beside Canute at the height of both of their power. After the year of 1043, Emma began to fade from the chronicles of history. An aging figure, she likely retired to Winchester, where she may have sought solace in a convent, as many Dowager queens had done before her. It was a quiet withdrawal from the tumultuous world of politics that had defined her life. Despite the distance from her son Edward, there appeared to be some attempts at reconciliation. In the year 1045, Emma's name appeared as a witness on a charter, granting privileges to Westminster Abbey, marking perhaps her last public appearance. On the 6th of March of the year 1052, at the age of around 67, Queen Emma of Normandy passed away in Winchester. Her death marked the end of an era, and she was laid to rest in the Old Minster beside her second husband, King Canute. Emma's tale endures, as she remains one of the most renowned of all Anglo-Saxon queens. Her life was an extraordinary tapestry woven with power, intrigue, and endurance. For 5 decades, Emma stood at the heart of English politics, becoming the Queen of England, Denmark, and Norway through her marriages. Far from being a passive participant in events that swirled around her, Emma became a formidable player herself, shaping her own destiny. Her story is a reflection of the power and agency of women in the Anglo-Saxon era, a reminder that even in a male-dominated world, a determined woman could seize control of her fate and leave a huge mark on history. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all soon for another History Profile.